I'm going to cover epics, stories, and the following constructs, which are very, very important for all agile methodologies. So while these epics and stories are terminologies, they came up with Scrum largely, but the core concept of epics or stories are equally applicable in almost all the agile constructs, and you will realize very soon why. Right? So let's not keep this. Don't keep epics and stories as a concept purely for Scrum, and it's not applicable anywhere else. They are just largely a term used for bundling of things or to explain certain things in a certain manner. Right? And I think this thing will get clear very, very soon. So let's begin. So to define, epics are larger bodies of work that stories roll up into. Okay, what are stories? Stories are the smallest unit of work, also known as a task. Okay, so an epic can span across multiple sprints and versions. So you can imagine, just in the definition of epic, I have already mentioned story, version, and sprint. So let me distill all the four things out. Right, so epics are larger bodies of work which can contain stories or tasks. Okay, story is the smallest unit of work, also known as task. Version is the release of software to the customer. I think you will have a notional sense of what is a version, right? And finally, sprint is an iteration. It's a single iteration where team does the work. Correct? So sprint is the bare bone, is the foundation where the team is working on something and they're producing something by the end of it. Okay? Now you can imagine after doing multiple iterations, they will be able to produce some meaningful software which can be called a version. So we have released version 1.0, we have released version 1.1 or whatsoever, correct? Depending on obviously the quantity of work and the overall picture. Now within a sprint, that is within a certain iteration, the task or the work that you're doing is divided into user stories. Okay? So that user story can be imagined or a task can be imagined as the smallest or the atomic size of a task in the software world. Okay. Now, with this as a background, it's not too difficult to imagine that a version or an epic, being a bundled form of work, can contain multiple sprints and can contain multiple stories. Correct? And similarly, a version can have multiple epics as well. Right, so version 1.0 will require at least 3 major epics to be finished, for example, right? And each epic can then have multiple stories within it, correct? And this stories, because the epic is too large, not all the stories can be done in one sprint or one iteration, and that's why it will be done over multiple iterations. So each epic can have multiple sprints. I think things will get very clear in the next few slides, right? So the work shown in the chart above could be selected to be in a version that is completed during one or more sprints, right? So initiatives happen at the portfolio level, that is at the vision level itself. Initiatives can also be imagined as themes, right? So it's important to point them out here so you can see that epics usually roll up to more strategic goals or initiatives. So in here in this slide, you can see, let me pull out a pointer. So you can see this epic is rolling up in a theme, correct? And these themes are then rolling up in a vision, correct? I'll give an example in the following slides, so I think that will make things very clear. So typically business goal, let's say for example the business goal is we need to increase the conversions in the next quarter. We are hitting about 3% conversion right now, we need to go up to 5% conversion for the cohort of urban females. Let's say that is a business goal, right? So that establishes the vision, right? Now from that vision, we will divide into 2 themes, 2 or more themes. It could be a single theme as well. So vision will translate into a theme, which is the delivered product capabilities. So for example, to increase the conversion, we deducted that females are going to convert better if they also get to see the sizing very, very clearly. Right now the sizing is not established very nicely, and that's why people, out of confusion, they don't end up buying. Okay, I'll not go into nitty-gritty of how exactly this was diagnosed because that's the subject of a different unit altogether. But for the moment, let's assume that we are smart enough to figure out that if we just change the way we are presenting the styling of a particular dress, we are sorted. Okay, so in that case, that becomes the delivered product capability, which is, and you will present it something like, you'll present in a manner that a theme, let me just imagine, a theme would be mentioned like present the styling in a much more user-friendly manner. So you can imagine it's a very fluffy way to say it, but that's how themes are. Themes are a little fluffy, a little over the top. That what will be a delivered product capability. Okay, then you will create few epics around it, and these epics are the easiest way to imagine this is they are customer marketable. Okay, they are customer marketable. So when you say something to a customer, so for example, when you say the mobile phone has a 16 megapixel camera, right? That's a customer marketable feature, right? And that is the level at which epic stands. Okay, and within epic, then there will be features. So 16 MP camera with f-stop of this much, takes low light photos and so on. Some of these will become epics, and some of these will actually become these features of the camera. Correct? So this is customer usable. So this is the difference. Customer usable is the feature, customer marketable is the epic. I think that is one thing that you need to remember. And finally, story is something that you'll do in one iteration. Okay, you will do that in one iteration. That is the story. Story is also called tasks, and for some people, stories again there's another hierarchy below story where they remove the task of the story from the story itself. So below the story, there will be another level where they will mention the tasks to complete that story. So that is kind of confusing, but this is how I work. The story is the smallest task that needs to be completed and the reason behind it. And on top of it is the feature, on top of that is the epic, and on top of that is the theme. Okay, and one small thing. So as you can imagine, when you go from bottom to the top, from story to vision, multiple iterations will be required. Multiple iteration means multiple sprints will be required, right? And depending on what exactly you are building, you might be able to produce. You might have to wait for the entire work to be done to release a version, or you might also be able to release part version. So that's why it will be 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. That is the part version that is releasing, and a major version would be called 1.0, 2.0, and so on. So to give an example, let's say the business goal was increase revenue. We are talking about a flight company, let's say an OTA, let's say MakeMyTrip, or let's say Ixigo, or one of these companies. The business goal is we need to increase revenue for the next quarter. Okay, increase revenue, not profit. It's very important to understand the difference. Increase revenue, right? So we need to get more bookings done. Okay. So what are the delivered product capabilities? I need to improve the flight search. I need to improve the flight booking experience, right? And improve the flight search experience. Now this is very broad overall themes. Now these themes can run over 6 months, can run for an entire year, depending on you're talking about Expedia or you're talking about an upstart, right? So the theme would run over, let's say 3 months, 6 months, depending on which company you're talking about. Now within the improved flight search, the customer marketable would be what? We will search across 30 sites. Let's say it's a kayak kind of an offering or a Ixigo kind of an offering. So we'll search across 30 sites or across 30 providers. Okay. And the search will have super low latencies, and because of that, the results would come out really, really fast, right? Similarly, improved flight booking. That's another theme. And under this theme, we have an epic, which is customer marketable. It's multimodal. Obviously, the language will be much more easier to understand what is multimodal and all. Multimodal to our understanding is where you can book in one instance multiple modes in one go. So you can book a bus, you can book a ticket, flight, you can book a train all together, or you can also book multi-hop, which is let's say I'm going from Delhi to London to US, and I'm going to stop at US as well as London. Okay, so So this becomes multi-hop and not a direct flight. So you're not booking directly from Delhi to US. You're booking Delhi to London and London to US. But you're doing it in one go. You're not booking it separately. Okay, this becomes multi-hop. Okay, and also to improve the flight booking experience, I'm also going to add a fare alert. So when the fare dips or increases beyond a certain number, I'm going to give you an alert. Fine. So you can imagine this is the customer marketable features that we can market or we can create a campaigns around. Now within this, below this is the customer usable features, which is save the past searches, right? So load latency के लिए क्या करना पड़ेगा? We'll have to save past searches. That is one way to reduce the latency. Another is we can also index the popular searches in that same sector in which I was searching. Now this is very complex. Okay. So this will require a lot of gyan, and obviously it will be much larger than this structure, but I think this will give you a good insight. So popular searches can be done in multiple ways. One method is it's user centric. So if Talvinder keeps searching for Delhi to US again and again, Delhi to San Francisco, Delhi to New York, Delhi to Denver, for example, if he's consistently searching, so one is at the user level, this guy usually searches for US, right? So I need to populate all the US data. I need to be ready for all Talvinder kind of users who are consistently searching for US. Okay. So this way I have already indexed it and I've kept it so that it is easier for me to retrieve it. So let's say if Talvinder searched at, let's say, 8 o'clock in the morning, let's say, and 7:55 there was another Talvinder kind of guy in Delhi who searched for the same sector, then I'll be able to pull the data from that guy instead of doing a full search in the servers, in the backend and everything. I'll rather do the search purely on purely here itself, right? I'll basically pull in the data from the person who just searched the same sector within a certain time bracket, within a certain distance bracket, right? That is popular searches. That is one way to implement it. Then multimodal can have long layovers. That is one approach, or hidden city approach. Long layover is, for example, like I said, Delhi to US, and I want to stop over in London for 2 days because I have some business work, let's say. So if I find a flight which gives me a long layover of about 2 days, I'm sorted, right? I don't have to pay to Delhi to London and then London to US. I can actually just book one flight which has a long layover. I just need to get a visa and a transit visa and I'm sorted. Correct? So that is long layover flights. So it can help people in finding such long layover flights. Might be people will enjoy our experience a little more. Obviously, this is very, very complicated technologically, but yeah, this is one possibility, right? Another possibility is hidden city. Hidden city is another concept. It's usually it's well known in the travel hackers domain, where hidden city is basically if you can go via that city, which they will not talk about the flight flight owners, flight operators, they will not talk about. But if you go via that city, you will end up paying very, very less. Okay. So read about it, is very fascinating. A lot of people are already doing it. Travel hackers are doing it. Okay. And similarly, SMS on pricing. So you can imagine these are all customer usable features, things that they will use directly. Correct. And within one iteration, in the save past searches, what all can we do? We have to save the past searches, plus we also have to present those past searches to the user on desktop, on mobile, or whatever source that he is accessing our app from. Correct? So we have to index the search, we have to do the desktop searches also. So perhaps in the one iteration we can only do this. Obviously this depends on how large the company is. If it is booking.com kind of a company, very large, then this one iteration, most likely desktop searches will not be done. Like within desktop searches also there will be a lot of tasks, right? So then there will be sub features, or there will be a checklist within this story, right? So this is how epic stories are typically mapped. Okay. Now this epics and stories, or this breakdown of work, effectively you can see this is just breakdown of work, nothing else. This breakdown of work can then be executed in any format. You can use Kanban, you can use Kanban, you can use Scrum, you can use Spiral, you can use anything. You can use practically anything. But yeah, practically any agile form. Okay. But yeah, this terminology, which is epics, stories, and so on, they originated from Scrum. Okay. So how do you measure epics? Right? How do you measure epics? How do you make sure that what you're doing is absolutely right? Okay. So epics and release or version. So epics, release, version, these three things, which are basically terms for a large bundle of work, right? These are burn down charts. They track the progress of development over a larger body of work than the sprint burn down. I'll explain the sprint burn down in the next sheet. And guide development for both Scrum and Kanban teams, right? Since a sprint for Scrum teams may contain work from several epics and versions, correct? So in a single sprint, you might have tasks from multiple epics, correct? So there is epic 1, there is epic 2, epic 3, and let's say in sprint 1, let's say for example in the previous slide, in this one iteration, let's say we have super talented, very large team, and we are able to take up all the tasks. So you can see in the same iteration, we have tasks from one epic, which is low latency. We have tasks from another epic, which is multi-modal. We have tasks from another epic, which is fair alert as well, right? So in the same iteration, there can be tasks going on for multiple sessions, multiple epics for the same iteration. Okay. So since a sprint may contain work from several epics and versions, it's important to track both the progress of individual sprints as well as epics and versions, right? So sprint to apne speed pe ja raha hai. We are seeing how fast or how slow it is going. That is great. But at the same time, epics bhi apne pace pe khatam ho ja rahe as the sprints are going, and versions are also getting closed as the sprints are completing. Correct? So it's important to track all the three. Okay. So scope creep, another concept that you need to know is scope creep. Okay, which is something which product managers are also guilty for, but typically business managers are usually guilty of. So scope creep is the injection of more requirements into a previously defined project. For example, तुमने define कर दिया कि भाई इस sprint में मैं इतना ही करने वाला हूँ. Okay, everything got decided Friday को हम लोग घर चले गए, Monday को काम शुरू होना था. And Monday ko, afternoon or evening ko, we got a mail saying that, hey, we also need to deliver XYZ. And suddenly the entire sprint plan went for a toss. Correct? जो चीज एक हफ्ते में होने वाली थी अब 10 दिन लगेंगे, and then people will come back to you saying that 10 दिन कैसे लग गए. Correct? That is scope creep. For example, if the team is delivering a new website for the company, scope creep would be asking for new features after the initial requirements had been sketched out. Correct? So while tolerating scope creep during a sprint is bad practice, scope change within epics and versions is a natural consequence of agile development. Getting my sense? So sprint के अंदर change नहीं होना चाहिए. If you're getting a new task, don't add it to the sprint directly unless it is like life threatening. It's critical. For example, the site went down, site crashed, or something happened. Obviously, if something like that happens, that takes the precedence. But unless it's life and death situation, sprint should not change. Okay, if you're following Scrum, Kanban में तो directly ऐसा कोई फंडा ही नहीं है, and that's why Kanban should be on top of Scrum and should not be used individually. It should not be used on its own. Okay. So coming back to this, so scope creep or new requirement should be added to the epic and not directly to the sprint. Okay. As the team moves through the project, the product owner may decide to take on or remove work based on what they are learning. The epic and release burn down charts keep everyone aware of the ebb and flow of work inside the epic and version. Okay? Now, typically what happens is in the day-to-day, and this is something which as a product manager you have to push for, is that this information or this the tasks are getting over and epics are getting over and so on. This needs to be manually and continuously updated. If you don't do it, it's very, very fast. What happens is the forecast will always be off. So you'll not be able to exactly understand, when epics will be over and when releases will be over, and you'll never be able to give a good answer to the business managers. Okay. So anti-patterns that you need to watch out for is epic or release forecasts aren't updated as the team churns through the work. No progress is made over a period of several iterations. Chronic scope creep, which may be a sign that the product owner doesn't fully understand the problem that body of work is trying to solve. or the business managers are pushing too hard and the product owner is not able to is not able to give a pushback. The scope grows faster than the team can absorb it. There is another possibility, right? The team is just not capable of handling that much of work, but the scope is just coming and coming, which basically means that we need to add more people or improve the quality of the people. Something needs to be done, right? And the team isn't shipping incremental releases throughout the development of an epic. So epic बनते जा रहा है लेकिन release नहीं हो रहा है. So which is again bad, which goes against the agile principle that we should ship as fast as possible. So let me just show you what exactly this means, right? So in this chart you can see there is an epic burn down. On the y-axis there are story points. We'll cover story points very soon. So on the y-axis there are story points, and on the x-axis there are sprints, the number of sprints. Correct? So to finish this epic, let's say the entire epic was worth X amount of work. Let's say forget about story points for the moment. Let's think of work in terms of hours, developer hours, right? Which is something which we understand a little better. So let's say the entire epic was worth 500 developer hours. Okay. Now one developer typically would invest about 200 developer hours per month, which basically means if there's only one guy, then this epic is going to take about 2.5 months. Correct? Because 500 work hours and 200 per month, so 2.5 months. If there are two people, it can be done within a month, a little over the month. Correct? Now let's assume that the sprint in their case is about 1 week or 2 weeks long. Let's say 2 weeks long. Right? So which basically means that to finish let's say there's one developer, to simplify the entire scenario. Let's say there's only one developer. So he was going to take about 2.5 weeks, which is about 10 weeks. Correct? So 10 weeks and the sprint takes about 2 weeks. So 5 sprints. So the entire epic is going to be done in 5 sprints. Okay. So after each sprint, a certain amount of work is done. So you can see here, the original estimate at the start of the epic was 15. Now in sprint 7, 2 tasks were done. 2 units of work were done. 13 units are pending. In sprint 8, another 2 units got added up. In sprint 9, another 4 units got added up, but 3 got done. In the next sprint, 12 units got done. 12 units are pending, but nothing got added, but 4 got subtracted. And in the sense, 4 got done. So based on this velocity, there are 6 sprints which are remaining. Right? For the last 3 sprints, it will take 6 more sprints to complete this epic. So now you have a better sense as to where am I going wrong. I can see that there's too much of addition, subtraction that is happening. So अगर यही चलता रहेगा तो बहुत slow काम खत्म होगा. Correct? Another way to look at it is this. Right? Same story. There are sprints on the x-axis, and story points or effort estimates in y-axis. Now you can see in the first sprint some work got done, second sprint some work got done, some work got done, right? And you can see this red line, right? Red line is the velocity trend line, where is it going? And blue is the work added or removed trend line, which is going like this, correct? So baseline is somewhere here, right? And backlog is the gray areas, okay? And effort remaining is the turquoise area. So typically, roughly where these two lines get intersect, which is here, roughly the 16th sprint is when the work will get done. And the average velocity is 47.36 story points per sprint. Right? So if you're equipped with this knowledge, you can actually answer and you have a little more clear answer as to what is happening. You can imagine this like a supply chain, right? So in this case, the supply chain is essentially churning out good features, software features, and you are trying to manage that, and you are trying to estimate the time by when it will get done. That's the whole logic behind this measuring epics or releases. Let's talk about sprints. Similarly, similar to what we spoke about in epics, same story that except in this case, because we are talking about sprints, we are talking in terms of days. Right, the time factor will remain on the x-axis and effort factor remains on the y-axis, right? So in the starting you said, okay, it's about 100 hours of work, Let's say it's about 100 hours of work. So we started from here, and 100 hours of work per day. I'm going to work for 8 hours. So approximately 12, 13 days I'll be able to get done. Or 15 days I'll be able to done. I'll be able to finish the work because there will be some chuttis in between. Okay, fine. So that was the initial red line. Okay. Then you started working, and few days you were really good, and it actually went ahead and beyond. But in few days you actually slacked, and you ended up finishing in 15 days, like you initially planned. Okay. This is exactly shown in this case also, that in different days you're finishing the work, and there's a trend line which shows that estimated completion date is roughly here. Correct? So I think this is pretty simple to understand. Right? So Scrum teams organize development into time box sprints, which is a certain number of days in which you have to finish a certain story points. At the outset of the sprint, the team forecasts how much work they can complete during a sprint. So a sprint burndown report then tracks the completion of work throughout the sprint. The x-axis represents time, and the y-axis refers to the amount of work left to complete, measured in either story points or hours. Like I said, so hours is an easy thing to understand. Story points is sort of convoluted. Let me explain that in a bit. So the goal is to have all the forecasted work completed by the end of the sprint. Obviously, right? 2 हफ्ते का plan बोला था, 2 हफ्ते में हो जाएगा, 2 हफ्ते में हो जाना चाहिए. That is the whole goal. A few days you might be hyper productive. You are working 18 hours, and few days you are not working. And that is the whole logic of Agile, right? कि अगर किसी दिन डेवलपर काम नहीं कर रहा तो chill मारो, परेशान मत हो, पेन मत लो. As long as he is able to finish the work in the forecasted time, तो कर लो. ये मत सोचो कि अरे एक दिन इसने slack किया तो शायद दो दिन काम हो जाते. That is not how it should be. Like we are talking about knowledge workers and not like physical workers, right? तो अगर थोड़ा सा इसको break मिल जाएगा, he'll be able to produce much more productive work. ठीक है? So the goal is to have all the forecasted work completed by the end of the sprint. वो कैसे करता है, कब करता है, रात को सो के करता है, क्या करता है, it is prerogative. A team that consistently meets its forecast is a compelling advertisement for Agile in their organization. But don't let that tempt you to fudge the numbers by declaring an item complete before it really is. Okay? It may look good in the short term, but in the long run only hampers learning and improvement. And another important thing I'll mention, which a lot of people do, is at least business managers tend to do, and which is what product managers need to push back for. अच्छा तुमने 2 हफ्ते बोला, 2 हफ्ते में काम कर भी दिया, so that means you can take up more work, or you're slacking too much, or you're not pushing yourself too much. That's the classic term. You're not pushing yourself too much. Well, pushing yourself too much and pushing yourself is good. Challenging the work is good, but there has to be a limit, right? That how much work can a person can really do productively. Otherwise, you will either lose out on that person, or the work that will be turned out will not be so good. And I'm sure we all have gone through this challenging work, right? So anti-patterns that you need to bother about. So the team finishes early sprint. Sprint after sprint, because they're not committing to enough work. So what happens in a sprint or in a Scrum scenario is the entire team commits to a certain amount of work. कि हम लोग इतना काम कर लेंगे in the next sprint, which is about 2 weeks. ठीक है? So if the team is continuously बार like 2, 3, 4 sprints continuously, they are able to finish early before the initial forecast. I know, unbelievable लगता है, लेकिन होता है. So they're able to finish the work early. That basically means they're not committing to enough work, which means they can actually do some more work. Correct? This is different from actually finishing their work on time and then being pushed. Right? The second scenario is the team misses their forecast sprint after sprint. वो 2-3 reasons हो सकता है, या तो they are committing too much work, or there's inherent inefficiency in how people are working. Correct? But in this scenario, give the benefit of doubt and actually work with the developers and give them just enough work that they start hitting the targets. Okay. The third is the burn down line makes steep drops rather than a more gradual burn down, because the work hasn't been broken down into granular pieces. Correct? So you can imagine, instead of a gradual steep change, a gradual slope downwards, it's a step change. If that is happening, that means कि वो अच्छे से granular level पे divide नहीं किया, बहुत ही बड़े level पे छोड़ा हुआ है. And because of that, the lines remain horizontal, and then जैसे काम खत्म होता है, it drops. There's a step change that is happening, which is reflective that the product manager or the product owner is not dividing the work properly. Okay. And finally, the product owner adds or changes the scope mid-sprint, which is pathetic, which should not happen. Okay. So let's talk about velocity a little more in detail. Okay, and I will use this scenario to also talk about story points. So what is exactly is product backlog and what really is happening in velocity? So velocity is basically the direction, or it's a vector quantity, like from physics we know. So it's basically, it indicates, I look at velocity as a vector quantity in this context also. It indicates the direction in which the work is going and by when it will get done. Okay, and how, at what speed, what is the number of hours that we are getting done per sprint effectively. Okay. So it's the average amount of work a Scrum team completes during a sprint. It is measured in either story points or hours, and is very useful for forecasting. Right? So if you know कि मेरे को, like I gave you an example, मुझे पता है कि okay 500 the epic is worth 500 hours. So if I'm able to finish about I don't know 100 units of work per week or per sprint, then I know कि I'll be able to finish the entire work in 5 sprints. Correct? So that's why velocity becomes very, very important. So how is it calculated or how is it looked at? So the product owner can use velocity to predict how quickly a team can work through the backlog, because the report tracks the forecasted and completed work. आपने forecast किया था कि 5 हफ्ते में हो जाएगा, और आपने complete किया था तो दिख रहा है कि आपने 3 हफ्ते में, after 3 sprints you just finished 200 work hours, 200 units of work, which basically means you are behind, right? After 3 sprints you have just done 200 or 200 units of work, which basically means you are about 60-70 hours of work you are doing, right? 60-70 units of work is what you are doing per sprint. So you are way behind than the 100 initial estimate, correct? So 5 हफ्ते में नहीं हो पाएगा. It will be done in about 7 to 8 weeks, 7 to 8 sprints, correct? And this is the meaning. This is the reason why velocity is so important to understand and implement. Okay. So let's say the product owner wants to complete. I think I've already covered this. I'll just jump ahead. Right. So it's important to monitor how velocity evolves over time. New teams can expect to see an increase in velocity as the team optimizes relationship and the work process. So starting में बहुत slow होगा. Starting में your projections will be bad because the team is just getting to know each other. Product manager, people do not trust each other's judgment that very well. So developers and everybody are not really well aligned, well tuned. But as you can imagine, like in a typical car, starting में थोड़ा सा ऊपर नीचे होता है, but after some time when the gears have set in, the oil has set in and everything has happened, उसके बाद फिर things take off, right? उसके बाद once the tuning has been set up, उसके बाद the productivity increases, right? At the same time, you can imagine if the team is not gelling well, if they're not tuning well, then it's better to break apart the team and set up a different team, because then the productivity will obviously decrease. So existing teams can track their velocity to ensure consistent performance over time, and can confirm that a particular process change made improvements or not. A decrease in average velocity is usually a sign that some part of the team's development process has become inefficient and should be brought up at the next retrospective. So think of this as a supply chain or a assembly line situation, right? So if one part of the assembly line is not doing their job really well, imagine a car getting assembled. If somebody is not doing their work properly, तो उस moment पे उस section पे things will get clogged up, right? And उसके downstream में things will obviously be will slow down, right? Because things are just not slowing down properly, correct? And that shows the inefficiency in the system, right? So when velocity is erratic over a long period of time, always revisit the team's estimation practices. Figure out कि estimation में गड़बड़ क्यों हो रही है, right? So किसी हफ्ते में 100 units कर ले रहे हैं, किसी हफ्ते में 50 units कर ले रहे हैं, ऐसा क्यों हो रहा है? Why are they not able to understand their capabilities, and why are they not able to estimate properly? Okay. Another thing that you need to understand is each team's velocity is unique. Don't expect each team to have the same velocity. So team A has a velocity of 50 and team B has a velocity of 75. So it doesn't mean that team B has higher throughput. That doesn't mean कि टीम भी फटाफट काम कर रही है, ठीक है, because दोनों के estimation culture अलग हो सकते हैं, the way they estimate, the way they plan, the detail in which the story has to be cleared out might be very very different for team A versus team B, correct? The velocity will also be different because the estimation, the method of estimation, etc. is different. So resist the temptation to compare velocity across teams because that is not how it works. Okay? Measure the level of effort and output of work based on each team's unique interpretation of story points. Because story points, so when I say something is tough, I would give that a story point of let's say 10, but you might give it 20 or you might give it 30, right? That doesn't mean that you are doing more work. It's just your baseline that you believe that this is way more complex, so I'm going to give it 30. Okay? So it's just a difference in the it's not a ordinal number, you can say it's a cardinal number. It's a relative number. Okay? So in this scenario, for example, what is happening? There's a product backlog, जिसमें there are few story points. Now there are numbers given which is 8, 5, 5, 4, 5. Now this can be seen as the number of hours that are required to finish this story. Or the other way to look at this is the story point. So now let me give me a moment to explain what is story point. So story point का फंडा इस तरह से निकल के आया है कि let's say there is person A, person B. Now person A says that I will do this task in 2 hours. Person B says I will be able to do this task in 4 hours. Task is the same, but one is saying 2 hours, one is saying 4 hours. Now there are ways that you can interpret this. One of the obvious ways that you can interpret this is one person has either done the task already in the past and that's why he knows exactly क्या करना है 2 घंटे में खत्म कर देगा. All other ways that this guy is very very smart, he's an expert, so even though he has not done it, but he is able to finish very very fast. So purely, but end goal as an agile owner, my task is to get a task done, right? So the best way to look at this is, instead of looking at number of hours, just look at the complexity of the task, right? And it's looked at in this manner because the complexity for a person who is an expert, who will say कि 2 घंटे में हो जाएगा, for him the complexity might be just 1, correct? And somebody who says that it's going to take 4 hours, उसके लिए complexity हो सकती है 2 या 3. It's the complexity 2 level problem or it's the complexity 4 number problem or whatever, right? So by instead of using number of hours and using story points or just giving a number to the complexity of the problem, you're essentially removing the subjectivity that can come along with the people involved, right? You want average numbers. You want a median number, so to say, right? कितनी complexity, how much of a complexity can be finish in a certain sprint, and for that number of hours don't help. What helps is actually the complexity. Okay? Because like I said, today it might be complex for me, tomorrow it will not be complex for me because I've already done it once, correct? So next time when I'm estimating, I'll estimate it as a story point 1 problem because I've already done it, I know it, and so it's not complex at all, right? So once you have this, now the entire team's complexity comes together, or entire team's story point come together, and then you know okay, in my team, a problem with the story point 8 takes about 16 hours to finish, right? So that gives you a much better estimate. Okay, instead of saying कि मुझे 4 घंटा लगेगा, because 4 घंटा का भी 4 घंटा लगता नहीं है, and that is one of the reasons why a lot of projects fail, because estimation is actually done on hours instead of story points. Now story point estimate के 2-3 तरीके होते हैं. One method is so some people use Fibonacci series. Okay, अगर नहीं पता तो please look it up. Fibonacci series, which is 1, 2, 4. Basically, the nth number is the summation of the previous 2 numbers. So they use Fibonacci series. That is one approach. The second approach is not giving any number, but using T-shirt sizes. So it's a small, it's a medium task, it's a large task, it's an Excel task, it's an XXL task, right? So that is another approach that is taken by a lot of people. So in this scenario, what is happening is, let's say now I'm going to talk in terms of story points. So in product backlog, we have 5 tasks with different story points, 8, 5, 5, 4, 5. Now in this sprint, let's say the team was super optimistic. They were like, we're going to take things heads on, and we're going to take up all the heavyweight stuff. So we picked the 8, 5, 5, and we took a chota task, which is 4. Okay. Now by the end of sprint, what happened was I was able to actually we realized apni awqat, and we ended up just finishing 8 and 5, just 2 tasks. And इसको partially खत्म कर पाए, इसको touch भी नहीं कर पाए. So for this sprint, the velocity is the 13 story points, right? Because we just finished 8 and 5. अब 5 में partial marks नहीं मिलते हैं, CBSE के exam नहीं, partial marks नहीं मिलेंगे. You'll only get the marks when, or you'll get the points you calculate on those points which are completely done by the end of it. Okay, this is 8 plus 5, 13. Now using this for every sprint, you can, or sprint or iteration, you can create a graph. In fact, in Jira, there's a whole, this is automatic generator. If you have broken down an entire task into sprints and epics and so on, it automatically generates this graph for you. Okay, this is one graph which you can see, sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3, and you can see what was the commitment, what was it delivered, and so on. And niche mein, this is another way to look at it, and this gives you an estimate of by when the work will be done. Okay. Now, I think Atlassian had released a report which said that typically 75% of typically whatever, if people are committed to 100 units of work, typically 75 units of work gets done on an average across all the teams that they have seen at large. Okay. And the iteration time or the sprint time, and the most common sprint time is about 10 developer days. Okay, most common or most productive. That doesn't mean that everybody uses 10 days, but a lot of people use actually 10 days or 15 days. Let's move along. This is another thing which you need to worry about or you need to know about, which is so अभी तक जो मैंने बताया, this one, velocity diagrams and all this is great for Scrum teams. So Scrum team में there are iterations that are happening. So you get to sense कि okay, by the end of it मुझे कब सारा काम मिल जाएगा, when will we be done. But what about Kanban teams, जहाँ पे work is just continuously flowing? वहाँ पे you look at cumulative flow diagram. This is again available in Jira. Right? So cumulative flow diagram is a key resource for Kanban teams, helping them ensure the flow of work across the team is consistent, with number of issues on the y-axis, right here, which is story points, and the time on the x-axis. So you can see that in all the graphs, effort is on the y-axis, time is on the x-axis. It remains the same. Okay? And colors to indicate the various workflow states, because in Kanban you essentially have workflow states, right? To do, doing, done, right? And developing or testing or whatever the state is, correct? So there are colors to indicate different workflow states. So it visually points out shortages and bottlenecks and works in conjunction with WIP limits and your work in progress limits. So in Kanban, typically you give a work in progress limit that at one point of time you can only pick up about 3 tasks. The reason you do that is because let's say क्या होगा कि let's say picked up, if you do not have that limit, let's say picked up task 1, थोड़ा काम किया, realize किया अरे बड़ा टफ है, बाद में करते हैं, दूसरा उठा लेते हैं, दूसरा भी करने लगे, लगा कि ये भी टफ है, तीसरा उठा लेते हैं, करते करते you have about 10 tasks in WIP and nothing is getting to the next stage. So by restricting the number of tasks that can be done in the WIP or the tasks that can stay in the WIP state, what you're doing is you're forcing people to finish that backlog, which is 3 tasks हैं जो निपटाने हैं. अगर नहीं निपट रहे हैं, so let's stop grooming the backlog or creating any kind of backlog. Let's stop that. Let's first resolve these 3 issues. So जो बाकी developers होंगे जो कि हो सकता है पीछे वाला काम कर रहे होंगे या आगे वाला काम कर रहे होंगे, like ahead of the WIP or behind the WIP, they will leave their task and will make sure that the bottleneck is sorted. Right? There is a फायदा of Kanban. So the cumulative flow diagram should look smoothish from left to right, right? Bubble or gaps in any one color. For example, in this, you can see there's a bubble here, right? There's a huge bubble here, right? That will indicate as a shortage or bottleneck. Here it is showing as a bottleneck, right? So when you see one, look for ways to smooth out color bands. So it should look smoothish, very smooth, very beautiful diagrams निकल के आने चाहिए. Okay. ये bottleneck हो गया, इसका मतलब क्या हो गया? Red color क्या था? Red color deployment. So deployment में बहुत सारे टास्क आ गए, दिख रहा है? तो 1 सितंबर से 1 अक्टूबर के बीच में there was a lot of work done in deployment alone, which basically means there was bottleneck. कुछ तो फंस गए यहाँ पे, and that's why it took so much of time. Correct? Rest you can see from here. थोड़ा सा complicated diagram होता है ये compared to the other diagrams that we saw. But yeah, this is one of the best ways to actually sleep peacefully when you're running a Kanban process. Correct? For example, cycle time दिख रहा है यहाँ पे. Cycle time is between this start of the purple line to the start of the green line. Why? Because purple line is in progress. So purple वाले जो tasks हैं वो सारे in progress tasks हैं. Red वाला in testing है. Yellow वाला ready for approval है. And green वाला is the ready to deploy. Cycle time का मतलब क्या होता है? The cycle is the time taken to finish one cycle, which is in progress से शुरू करके ready to deploy में कितना time लगा. That is why it's cycle time. So the time taken. So if you draw a vertical line from here to here, you can actually see the cycle time between these two lines. ठीक है? Lead time is the time taken from ready to start. यानी यहाँ पे task पूरा ready हो चुका था. All the dependencies, everything was sorted. It was just a matter of just picking it up and actually finishing it or deploying it, right? Developing it and deploying it. So lead time is the time taken between ready to start state to deployed state. So you can see this, if you draw vertical lines from here to here, you can see the lead time changes from in time, right? So कभी-कभी lead time बहुत ज़्यादा है, कभी-कभी lead time बहुत कम है. So similarly, I think you can just look at this diagram to get a sense of what exactly different terms are. Okay. If there are any issues, please feel free to buzz me. Beyond this, there are some common sense metrics. I'll not call them as this is not part of any theory or anything. These are basically common sense metrics. What are these? So basically, what you need to look for is not just the quantity, कितना काम निकल रहा है, कितना product produce कर रहा हूँ, but also the quality of work, right? What is the quality of software that I'm producing? And how can you check it? Few of the methods is how many defects per iteration, how many bugs per iteration, how many defects post the release, how many customer support tickets are being raised purely for technology, purely for software, purely for app release, right? Coverage of automated tests, right? So coverage of automated tests, how many, when we're running those automated tests, is it covering 100% of the lines or is it covering just 50% of the lines, for example? Right? This is a common sense metrics, right? So Agile team should look at release frequency and delivery speed. At the end of each sprint, the team should release software out to production after each sprint. So how often is that actually happening? We need to know that. कि हर iteration के बाद are we releasing software? If you're not releasing software after every sprint, तो कुछ गड़बड़ है या कुछ गड़बड़ है या फिर I'm giving a blanket statement, but ideally there should be something getting released after every sprint. If it's not releasing, there better be a solid reason for it. ठीक है? Are most release builds getting shipped? Release हो गया, लेकिन release के बाद क्या ship भी हुआ? यानी कि did it go in public? In the same vein, how long does it take for the team to release an emergency fix out to production? Let's say something bad happened, right? Somebody hacked or some major bug, got reported in the production. So कितना fast? How quick is the team to respond to that, right? Is release easy for the team or does it require heroics? यानी कि release करने के लिए क्या बहुत मेहनत करनी पड़ जाती है? That if you have to drop everything and focus purely on release, or is it a smooth process? So when you're releasing, you're not losing your sleep on it, right? That is where continuous integration and all of these concepts have emerged. We'll talk about that later in the technology unit. So metrics are just one part in building a team's culture. They give quantitative insight in team's performance and provide measurable goals for the team. While they're important, don't get obsessed with the quantitative numbers. This is very, very important. As a product manager, you might end up making such mistakes. So listening to teams feedback during retrospectives is equally important in growing trust across the team, quality in the product, and development speed through the release process. Okay? So use both quantitative and qualitative feedback to drive change. Don't just use quantitative numbers and don't think of them as bandhwa mazdoor. This is knowledge work, right? We're building something, some knowledge products, right? Finally, scaling of Agile. Scaling of Agile is something which Ajay has already covered in the session, right? And there are two tactics to it. I'll just give this terms because scaling of Agile is a different problem altogether, and which Ajay very beautifully summarized in his own session, talking about solver teams and the 2.0 and the 3.0 and how exactly they're being looked at. So one approach is Scrum of Scrums, which is basically once in a while. So for example, once in a month or once in a quarter, you will conduct a Scrum of Scrums. That's one approach. Second approach is if you have a lot of teams, for example, in Agile's case, there were about 25 Scrum teams running together, right? So what you can do is you can conduct a small Scrum of Scrum where a team representative will quickly just mention कि मैं क्या कर रहा हूँ, मेरी टीम में क्या होता है, and it can be done once in the week or once in 2 weeks. So it is not exactly the regular Scrum, but it's a little larger. Obviously, 25 लोग बात करेंगे तो 15 मिनट में नहीं हो पाएगा, and that's why it's very critical that time is respected and only one person just presents कि मैं क्या कर रहा हूँ, so everybody is aware कि what is happening in the entire organization. Right? Sometimes the organization also adopt a different method, which is there will be a common forum where they'll keep announcing what is happening. But it has been seen that the benefit of having people together, or at least hopping on a video call if physical calls are not possible, then hopping on a video call and putting things together or explaining what is happening together makes a lot more sense than writing notifications down, because people don't read that. Okay. Acha, दूसरा is SAFE, which is a proprietary method. I'm just putting it out there because I just want you guys to be aware of that something like this also exists. So SAFE is basically Scaled Agile framework or something. So I'll recommend that just read through this, which is Scaled Agile framework. So you can see it's an ugly diagram, but I think a better description is given on Wikipedia. So how exactly you scale up your Agile function, and it is typically looked at in very large teams, very large teams. So just have a look at this. You will not be using this immediately, but it's good to know. It's good to know because you never know कौन सी company will end up, and having an idea about this will help you. Okay. So that's pretty much it, guys. I think we have covered the entire epics and stories topic. I'll be more than happy to take up questions. And because we were covering a separate unit today, so it makes sense if you guys just drop me a question on Slack. Okay. Thank you so much, and hopefully you like the topic today. Take care. See you soon.